right. Welcome to the first episode of the Synaxis podcast. I'm Jordan.
I'm Josh.
And this is our first podcast ever, so we're still kind of getting our feet wet. We're still figuring out what the podcast is. It's going to take its form as we go along, but yeah, we just kind of wanted to sit down and talk about things.
Yeah, Jordan and I have known each other for, like 10 years now? Something like that?
Yeah, at least a decade.
At least a decade, yeah. We used to work at a Christian camp together in our area, which we're not going to say where it is. But, yeah, we worked together at a Christian camp in a kitchen. And I think you were Christian at that point, but maybe not Orthodox all the way?
Yeah, I was still a catechumen, but I got baptized around that time. I think 2011.
Yeah.
2010. And we were friends because we were both into like conspiracy stuff.
Yeah.
Because you started being like, hey, have you heard about this like weird conspiracy New World Order thing? And I'm like, yeah. That's something I was looking at.
Yeah, that was always really cool to find someone else who was interested in the same stuff. I remember a lot of like Protestants would come in and try to like convert me in the kitchen, and I was really into like philosophy and stuff already at that time. And like a lot of what they were coming with was not super compelling, so it was kind of, and I was always like pretty disagreeable, so they would come in and I would just like dunk on Protestants, and it was pretty fun, but they were all really kind-hearted and really good. But we definitely bonded over having like similar interests. We were into conspiracy stuff, which was cool because, you know, finding other people at the same age into the similar stuff was cool, especially because I was at a Christian camp and I wasn't Christian, so I was like, oh, this guy's super rad. Yeah.
I mean, I was already getting into Orthodoxy, like we said, but then I mean, that was just a time when I was absorbing like all of that, like,
yeah, for sure,
alternative crazy stuff. I remember seeing a bunch of like AJ documentaries, and a lot of David Icke. I remember back in the day, a big conspiracy thing for me was Vigilant Citizen, because he wasn't the only one that was talking about that stuff, but it was a good collection of everything about like Hollywood. He would decode like Hollywood esoteric stuff and talk a lot about like MK Ultra and like the Monarch programming, and he had all the primary sources up there too. So he put up like all the PDFs of like Edward Bernays propaganda and like Manly P. Hall. I think definitely a lot of occult stuff, Fritz Springmeier, stuff like that. Yeah. And that all of that was really mind blowing, and it seemed to fit. It made sense in my worldview because I was already kind of sensitive to the idea that the age of Antichrist is upon us and all of that stuff. Like the New World Order is pretty much prophesied in the book of Revelation. And that was one thing that kind of drove me to accepting Christianity, is just the crazy stuff that was happening in the world and how Christianity seemed to make the most sense out of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like you could relate to that.
Yeah, for sure. And because I didn't have like any kind of Christian framework at the time, like when you start realizing that there's like big geopolitical things that go on that aren't just like democracy, it's more like realpolitik, or like the, you know, elites doing things covertly and using espionage and spycraft. Like when you realize that kind of stuff goes on at like a big level, and that, you know, the way that money or fiat, like money is created in the world, fiat paper currency, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Like it definitely opens your mind up to like, oh wow, like there's a lot going on I didn't really understand. And if you don't have a biblical framework for it, then it's inevitable that you get into like weird conspiratorial stuff, because the alternatives are people like David Icke showing up and being like, oh yeah, like there's a banking system and they use the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements to do all this sketchy stuff. Oh, and also they're space reptiles. Yeah, you know? And that's kind of one of those things where it's like they do say a lot of half-true things, you know? You know, and I think he's on like a weird Gnostic kick or something now, but you know, I think that if you don't have a framework for that, like all the New World Order stuff is going to be something like, oh dude, it's like aliens messing with the planets, or, you know. Yeah, it easily
Gets out there with all the different rabbit holes. So I'm thankful that I had Orthodoxy as kind of a foundation for that. And Father Seraphim Rose was a huge one for me at the time. And we were kind of bonding over just kind of the clash of worldviews. Yeah. And it was actually really fun to like. Yeah. I feel like you helped me articulate what I believed. Yeah. Because I had you as a foil to be like, well, what about this? Yeah, yeah. Like, how could Christianity be the truth? And I had to like actually really think about it. Yeah. So I'm really.
Yeah, you were my first introduction to Orthodoxy, because like when I was there like dunking on Protestants, there was you and I think like two other people who were Orthodox there, and I remember going to one of the cafes.
Yeah.
And like I was super into conspiracy stuff. In Cafe, there was like a local Orthodox bookstore that would do like I think once a week that there would be like women in there making coffee and stuff. Whoever came in, there'd be a priest.
Free coffee. People would come in. A lot of homeless people and stuff. Yeah, and the priests would hang out.
Yeah, and they would hang out and talk to them. And I remember going in and like probably just being like arbitrarily argumentative about something and trying to be like, like the IMF and like the central banks and, you know, fractional reserve banking, and just do like kind of like getting a little insane. And like, and I was so impressed that I don't even remember the priest that it was, but he like knew what I was talking about. And he was like, yeah, like the Bank of International Settlements. And like, I was so impressed that he knew how like the currency and money was created and like Federal Reserve stuff. It like blew my mind that there was this priest there in like religious garbs, just like crushing in a geopolitical conversation. And like my interactions with Christians for the most part before that, like very sweet, you know, very well-meaning, but like usually not the kind of person that I would get into an in-depth conversation with and be impressed.
Just a little bit willfully ignorant.
Yeah.
But totally well-meaning. Yeah.
Totally well-meaning.
Because we both have kind of the trajectory of like we sort of grew up with like nominal Protestantism. In a way, we were like that was like the first Christianity we were exposed to.
Yeah.
At least, yeah, definitely speaking for myself. And so like for a while I kind of rejected that. But really, I started getting into Orthodoxy because of my dad, because he found that same bookstore, and he started bringing home Father Seraphim Rose and like St. Anthony stuff that really blew my mind. And like it took a few years for me to really warm up to it, but definitely, for me, I remember like the big turning point was taking a world religion class, and like the section on Taoism really spoke to me. I really thought Taoism was beautiful, and it made me remember, wait, my dad had that book, Christ the Eternal Tao, and he was telling me how the Tao in Taoism is actually Jesus. And like that, I was like, wait, I want to go back and read that. And that book just, I credit that book with converting me to Orthodoxy. Like, it just blew my mind and touched my heart in a way that is hard for me to articulate.
It is so good. And yeah, I was always really into Taoism because I did martial arts when I was younger. I did kind of kung fu, and my teachers were Taoists, so it was mixed in with like qigong and like breathing exercises, and like all this stuff that they would say in martial arts ends up just being like stuff from Taoism. And I didn't realize that, but when I got older and I got more into Taoism, I was like, oh, this is like a lot of the martial arts stuff that I did. So yeah, I definitely had like a soft spot for that kind of thing. And like, yeah, I didn't really have like a super nominal Christianity. It was almost like I grew up without like a very coherent background metaphysic. It wasn't like, we're this thing. It was my grandma was super Christian, Protestant, really great. Like my grandma's one of the best people that I've ever met for sure. And my mom, born again Christian, I think when I was like 13 or 14 or something. She like, there was a charismatic pastor guy who had like a garage church up the road, and she started going to that. And like my mom changed, you know, like she got better in a lot of ways. She became like a better person. Like, and a lot of the Protestant stuff at that time, it's like not super coherent to me. It wasn't the kind of thing that was even very interesting. So yeah, I was definitely did the big perennialist turn and was like, oh, like there's, you know, like maybe religion is good in general, but like maybe there's all this, maybe there's like a skeletal outline truth thing, you know? So I definitely did that path for a while before I got reinterested into Orthodoxy. You know, but you're definitely credited with the guy that introduced me to Orthodoxy, which is great.
Yeah, I mean, and like, it's funny because like I got into Orthodoxy, I went like backwards. I kind of went backwards a little bit because I started Orthodox. Well, not started, but I converted to Orthodoxy, and then I started discovering, because I met you, and we would argue about stuff, and it was fun.
It was fun.
It was really fun to argue about, like, because you were definitely not Christian at the time, and that was my framework. So I was trying to use like Father Seraphim and the saints to argue with you about stuff about like the UFOs are actually demons, and like, and all of that, and like the New World Order thing. It made the most sense to me in my paradigm at the time. Yeah. But then I discovered like Charles Upton, who was a perennialist author, and he has this book, System of Antichrist. And I remember like just the way he critiqued like New Age pseudo-spirituality. It felt like I could use that to kind of communicate with other people who were in that. Yeah. And I really got into that. I struggled with it for a while because...
Maybe do like a what is perennialism thing, because I feel like we use a lot of terms so casually.
Yeah, I mean, perennialism in general is just the idea that all the religions are manifestations of like the one divine truth, and they're all pathways back to God. Like I hear the illustration all the time that it's like all paths up the same summit to the mountain, and the traditionalist perennialism is a little bit more niche than that. They have this idea of like the transcendent unity of religions, where not every, but a lot of the big world religions are expressions of divine truth, and they all lead back to the divine, because they'll say God has revealed himself in different revelations to different cultures, but there are orthodox, authentic forms of those traditions that should be followed, and then there are other not like heterodox, and sometimes even antithetical aberrations or diversions from the tradition. Yeah, they'll say that there are multiple trails up the mountain, but not all of them lead to the top. I still respect those guys, but I don't fully agree with them. I definitely believe that Christ is the fulfillment of all those revelations, I guess you would say, and his incarnation is the unique thing about Orthodoxy. I mean, Christianity in general, but Orthodoxy specifically. And so I've kind of come back around full circle.
Yeah.
I mean, I still haven't found anyone saying like what makes a tradition valid. I haven't found like a concrete like this is what makes a tradition valid. But
and I definitely understand the idea that if you're going to climb up a mountain, like paths are a way to do it that is less dangerous. You know, there's a reason why people have taken certain paths up the mountain. Like I get that kind of argument. And yeah, I was really interested in perennialism for a long time. Mm-hmm. I definitely think it has a lot of good qualities and then some pitfalls. But compared to, you know, like I feel, yeah, like Guénon and the really sincere traditionalist schools, I really feel like there's something there that I, in a way, respect, because it seems like the diving into a tradition all the way is far better than some kind of syncretism where you pick and choose things you kind of arbitrarily like out of certain traditions.
Yeah.
And they become more embodied into a single tradition, which I really like. I liked their critique of like the New Age kinds of modern lame spirituality, because like I did the Burning Man thing for a bunch of years in a row, and like I saw a lot of that like wooey but well-intentioned New Age stuff. And yeah, it's not good. It's usually like bad ethics. It's usually some syncretist form of like Eastern religion where you just mishmash things you like. Usually like not even any kind of in-depth understanding of the things. It's just some vague Vedanta kind of like, oh, I'm the self is God, like the Jivatman is the Paramatman, like the individual soul is the ultimate soul and I'm God. And for a lot of people, I'm not saying it's like inherently like that, but it kind of like deletes any kind of like necessary ethical picture. So it's like, dude, I'm the face of the universe. Like, I'm the only one that gets hurt. Like, if I do bad things towards other people, it's kind of all right, because it's just me I'm doing it to in disguise, you know? It's all Maya. It's all just like an illusion, bro. And there's a lot of like sketchy occult stuff I remembered reading in the past that would kind of just be like, dude, you're just the face of the cosmos. Who cares, dude?
Yeah.
And like, I don't like that stuff. And like, that's very embedded in the New Age stuff. So at least the traditionalist school would recognize that the religions that stayed around have some kinds of the archetypal truths in them that are real. Yeah. And they're more accurately represented in Orthodoxy. But it recognizes that, you know, you're not like some low tier religious person who's like, this is the only thing that's true. No one else in the world in any other culture found any kinds of archetypal or like religious truths at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I respected about them, because they tried to take each tradition like on its own terms and talked about like you have to really devote yourself to the path. So all of a sudden when I'm reading those guys, the other religions seem very Christian in a way, and for me, I read Orthodoxy into all that stuff, so I was like, this is an interesting way to look at religion. But as I struggled with it, because on one hand it does validate and vindicate the Christian worldview, but on the other hand, it kind of seems to undermine it as well. So trying to be an Orthodox Christian, listening to the perennialists, and trying to devote myself to this one tradition, there was definitely a disconnect where it's like you either believe that God became man in Christ and he's the only way to the Father, or you believe that there are other paths to him that might also be Christ, like on another plane. Because that's how I used to kind of think about it, was it's like almost a multiverse of like religions, where it's like Christ appears to all these different traditions, and I really liked that way of looking at it. And maybe that's true, but I don't think it is. Like, living the Orthodox life, learning about the Orthodox theology, I've definitely put perennialism aside and said, I don't think these things are compatible. And it's almost like a Pascalian wager, where it's like, if the perennialists are right, then I'm doing good.
Yeah.
But if the Christians and like the saints are right, then I'm in heresy and my soul's in danger.
Yeah. Like, and if the perennialists are right anyways, they'd tell you to just be an Orthodox.
Yeah.
Like, the perennialist would be like, yeah, join the deepest version of the thing that you have, which would be Orthodoxy anyways. Right.
I think there's a quote from Elder Sophrony where he says that it's something like, wrong dogma will manifest itself in a distorted life, or something along those lines. That's just a paraphrase, but I definitely feel that, because having this room to kind of, well, maybe there's like an underlying truth outside of Orthodoxy, it definitely gave me the room to kind of go astray. I'm not necessarily saying that like everybody who's into perennialism is gonna do that, but when I look back on my life back then, I was definitely in a pretty disordered place. I was definitely divided against myself, and that could be indirect or directly related to trying to hold these two seemingly irreconcilable worldviews at once.
Yeah, I think one of the things about perennialism and occultism, I heard someone say occultism is like a chew toy for people with a high IQ, because it's like interesting and there's commonalities between religions and it points them out really well. Mm-hmm. So it kind of is one of those things that's like a trap for certain people, where it, in a way, being really deep into perennialism, even though it says become embodied in a single tradition, it's easier to keep a foot out of a single tradition, because you recognize how that what they would say is that there's a validity in the other traditions. So it's like the bell curve meme, where there's like the low end of the bell curve could be like, Jesus is the truth, and the high end is also saying that.
Yeah.
You know, but I could see the perennialist part of it. You know, you could be like, but there's truths in this other thing, so you're not really embodied. Where someone who maybe has a less intellectual mind or isn't really geared towards that thing probably doesn't have the temptations to look at the truths of the other religions. They're just like, this is the thing I'm a part of. My family were this. I'm going to go into this thing. And in a lot of ways, they might be better off than being like, you know, knowing all the philosophies in the world and, you know, picking and choosing and being like, oh, they're kind of the same, but it might stop you from fully embodying into one.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like people like Gainon would say, like, you can't mix the religions together. That's really dangerous. And like, that's what we see happening. So they seemed like kind of an ally in that sense, because the one world order and the one world religion seems to be on the horizon. And so they seem to be voices kind of critiquing that and being against that. But I think I've been seeing that they're also kind of undermining definitely Christian truth in a really subtle way. And kind of, even though they outwardly are against the new religious movements and the one world religion that's emerging, I think they're also kind of unwittingly participating in it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why like Aldous Huxley wrote a perennial philosophy book, right?
Yeah.
And he's like definitely part of the like, his brother started UNESCO and that whole thing. Like, he's definitely part of like an elite clique that we're like, yo, there's going to be elite that runs the world, dude. So like, I can see how elites and powerful people like the idea of some kind of ecumenical movement or some kind of thing that is like, hey guys, like, we could just all just get along and we could just have like a global central bank and we can have like a global governing council. But like, look, like, you're God, dude. You know, it's like it can strategically be used for like power at like a geopolitical level.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
Yeah, I did the same kind of thing. I took comparative religions and probably even at the time when I worked at the Christian camp, I was really into like Alan Watts and that kind of, so I was like being exposed to like Eastern thought that I'd never really considered, and I probably listened to like 1,000 hours of Alan Watts, or maybe everything he had on audio, and same with like Manly P. Hall. So I kind of like did a little perennialist turn for a minute where I was just interested in all the stuff generally, which kind of led to some interest in the occult for a minute, and just like read a bunch of occult stuff just because it's interesting, and you know, it has the same kind of like framework. There's a lot of Platonic stuff inside of it that's, you know, interesting. It like, at least from a materialist perspective, like occultism is interesting, or like it seems to beat materialism, but it's like a weird perverted form of something that is true.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
I mean, the name Seraphim Rose has come up a lot, and like I think that he's a huge figure for both of us.
Yeah,
because we've called him the patron saint of lost Westerners.
Yeah,
and his trajectory is really similar. I mean, he grew up Protestant, and he was kind of disillusioned with that, and then he started getting into Eastern religions. He studied Taoism. That's where Christ Eternal.
I think he studied with Alan Watts too.
Yeah, he studied under Alan Watts for sure.
And then I got like a teacher from like a traditional Taoist school and like learned Chinese.
Yeah, and he got super into Rene Guénon, who he says was like his introduction to putting truth above all else, and to actually take the authentic traditions of the religion seriously, and that's what got him into Orthodoxy. And he went to a cathedral in San Francisco and met St. John, and then he became a monk. And now I think he's a saint. I mean, he struggled in the wilderness. Like all of his works have like changed the world really at this point. So I'm all about Father Seraphim.
Yeah, he's the coolest for sure. You were at his repose, right?
Not his repose. Or not the repose.
The anniversary.
The anniversary of it. I was just at the 40th anniversary, which was great.
Cool.
Really, for me, becoming Orthodox, the biggest, besides reading Christ Eternal Tao, is the lives of saints. And meeting people who had been transformed by this religion, by this truth, because that's the really true representation of it, or saintly people. And when you meet like monks who have that like light in their eye, and who have just that wisdom and just that carefree like spirit, and you can feel the grace that's on them. I think that's the biggest pull, because that. I've been coming to this idea that like intellectual debates are really good, but there's going to be a point at which you're not going to be able to change somebody's mind logically. It's going to be through like appealing to their heart, and through like loving them and suffering for them, and being Christ-like. And that's how you would actually change people, instead of just like battering them over the head with theology and stuff.
Yeah.
Which sometimes can maybe. I mean, like for you, it wasn't necessarily Jay Dyer like battering somebody, but it kind of was.
Yeah, Jay Dyer's the man. Yeah, totally. I was really into Stefan Molyneux for a long time, doing like the ANCAP thing, like super libertarian. And then I saw like Jay Dyer just like bully Molyneux in a debate, about like abstract objects, kind of like Platonist kinds of, not Platonist, it's Orthodox Christianity, but he was kind of using like Platonic arguments against like the presupposed materialism of Molyneux, and it totally just blew my mind. And it blew my mind that it was coming from like a Christian perspective and from like an Orthodox Christian perspective, and that it was argumentative and disagreeable. It was totally like trying to get to what's true using like logic, and I was very impressed. But yeah, I like that in the Orthodox Church there are saints who are scholars, and then there are ones who are illiterate. It's not the kind of thing that you have to have a deep intellectual knowledge of things to achieve theosis.
Yeah, and reading about the lives of saints, and especially the more recent ones who suffered under like the Bolsheviks. Like Father George Kalshi was a huge one for me, and Father Arseny was another one. Both of them suffered through communist prisons that were so dreadful. And because Father George Kalshi was in the Romanian re-education camps, the Pitești prison experiment, and which is one of the most brutal things I've ever read about. And he when he got out of it, he said that he'd never been closer to God than when he was in that darkness, because it forced him to kind of go outside of himself and reach out to the divine. And he said his prayer was never deeper than when he was in there. And so knowing that like in the darkest places you can find the light it was the beauty of that really kind of touched my heart and helped me convert to Orthodoxy, because we see that darkness encroaching everywhere right now in the world. And even just since then, I mean, everybody knows what's happened in the last couple years. And knowing what's behind that, and we kind of saw it coming. I mean, you couldn't really see it coming, but when it happened, you could recognize it for what it was. Yeah, that's a huge thing, to have that unbreakable faith, which hopefully I'll have someday.
yeah, totally.
But yeah, with all that said, what kind of gave birth to this podcast really was Montanica 1. Because you started getting into Orthodoxy because of Jay Dyer.
Yeah, I listened to like a lot of Jay Dyer. I got super into Jay Dyer, and he was going to be at Montanica.
Yeah, and I hadn't been too into him until you kind of started sending me stuff. Because, I mean, yeah, we've known each other for so long, and we would reconnect over the years and everything, because it was always fun talking to each other.
And Jay Dyer also had, like, geopolitical kinds of interests, too.
Yeah.
So he, like, a lot of the wooey conspiracy stuff, like, not all wooey, but a lot of conspiracy stuff from when I was younger that I was getting into, like, came to a way clearer picture listening to a lot of Jay Dyer.
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of the Elite book series and the stuff he read from the Elites, like, all the tragedy and hope stuff, it's way more of, like, source material for the kind of stuff that you see a dude with 1,000 bumper stickers and he like yells at you. Like, it's way more sourced in totally really than people imagine. So Jay Dyer like definitely changed my views on a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The way he anchors everything in primary sources without speculation for the most part.
Yeah.
It's just so persuasive, and it's really hard to deny a lot of that stuff at this point.
Yeah. So yeah, we embarked on like a 14-hour drive or something to Montana.
Yeah.
To go to Montanica, which was awesome. And that was like Jay Dyer, David Patrick Harry Kotel was there. Father Dr. Deacon Ananias was there.
Father Dr. Deacon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Brother Augustine.
Yeah. They were the 4 speakers that first year. We met a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
That was a great trip. And just on the drive, we would just have these great conversations, and we were like, we could probably do a podcast.
Yeah, it was really fun, actually. The drive was, I thought it was going to be horrible to go on like a 14-hour drive, but it ended up being really fun, just like reading Wikipedia articles and laughing, and it ended up being really fun. So I was like, yeah, I bet we could talk for a while, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I remember going to that UFO cult meeting together, like way back in the day. It was around the same time, like I think we were still working at the camp and stuff. And you had seen David Icke at that theater. Yeah. Like one of those like 5-hour
Yeah, totally. Things. Yeah, with a friend, with one of my conspiracy homies from the climbing gym.
Yeah. What was that like?
It was pretty cool. I mean, like David Icke, I feel like is one of those dudes who like he has a lot of true stuff that he says, you know? Like a lot of the things he'll say generally about like the world conspiracy going on and how like the elites do things through think tanks, and you know, he'll bring up the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission and all these really tangible, provable kind of sketchy elite things that go on, and he'll bring up central banking and the Federal Reserve, and then he'll go right into how it's reptilian aliens and how like the moon is a spaceship, and like man, like some of that stuff I remember being so like, dude, David Icke's the man, and then some of it I was like, oh man, like this is kind of out there.
Yeah, and he gets into really like new agey Gnostic stuff of like we have to raise our vibrations.
Yeah.
And, like, I think he talked about having like a weird ayahuasca experience where like entities came down and told him like the truth of the universe or something, which is always sketchy.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the 80s or whatever, early 90s, he said he was the son of God or something like that. He did. I think it's like that general like perennialist, you know, like some guy wakes up to like vague Eastern truths from like a materialist paradigm and is like, whoa, like consciousness is a thing and like life is weird and what's going on.
Yeah.
But I think generally now he's done, like a weird Gnostic take where the world is like a prison, and that's probably what like Spaceship Moon is doing, is like, I think that's what he even said at the talk, is like shooting a, it's putting a frequency out that dumbs us down, and the reptilians are doing it, and I think the Greys are robots that work under them or something. And
I remember watching one of his like 5-hour lecture things, and he had a whole section on demonology where it like almost accidentally got really close to Orthodox demonology, where he lists all the different like the jinn and the archons and like all the different names for demons throughout the Chitauri, mate. And then he starts talking about how like they hate humanity because we have this inherent divinity in us, and they want to snatch that away from us, and they have this envy, and that's what's really motivating them. And I was like, that's actually really insightful. That's a pretty like Orthodox theological take on what these things are. But then he completely like goes off the rails.
I think recently I heard an interview where he was talking about something, I don't think he even says the words the demiurge, but he's pretty much just putting forward like more ancient Gnosticism where you know, there is whatever we're trapped in is like a simulation, and there's a big mind behind it, and it's actually bad, and like, and it kind of all implies the Gnostic other stuff where the body's bad, the physical world is bad,
the material world's a prison, and the creator God put us here, and
it's the Matrix. It's literally like the Matrix, and you're stuck in the Matrix, and the architect of the Matrix is totally a bad guy, and really you need special knowledge and you need the gnosis to escape the world. So like, I'm not a big fan of that. But I understand why you can be led to turns like that, and especially if he just reads a bunch of the stuff. You'll open up the Nag Hammadi and look at the archons, and it'll match with other things he already believes. Where we're being ruled by secret society, so now he's like, the secret society is these reptilians, and they're run by this big evil mind that traps us in the cosmos.
And that's a big thing about learning about Orthodox theology and why they say Gnosticism is a heresy. And it's because it leads to that mentality of like the material world is evil, but we would say that no, it was created good, and it's been distorted and it's fallen now, but Christ in his incarnation, by becoming human and uniting humanity with divinity and restoring human nature, it makes matter good again. And that's why we have like holy water and holy bread and all this stuff, and like communion is like obviously the central thing about that, and that's just like the marriage of heaven and earth kind of, and just the reconciliation of God and man, which is completely inverted in Gnosticism, where it's like God is this evil bully that we have to resist and we have to rebel against. And then that always, almost without fail, always turns into Lucifer is the bringer of wisdom, and he can free us from this. And so people always, maybe not always, but people tend to go towards like this weird Luciferian satanic, even if it's unconscious, like that kind of starts creeping in when you start having this mentality. And but we did, so you saw David Icke at that theater. And that was in the big room, right?
That was the big one, yeah.
It was like thousands of people.
Yeah, it was huge. And I think they served us like vegan food or something. I don't even know if Ike might have one of those turns now where, maybe eating meat is bad because everything is God, kind of. But maybe not if he's in a Gnostic world now.
I don't know.
But I'm not really sure. But they gave us all like vegan food, and it was a pretty enjoyable talk in general. But it was the same place that the other thing happened.
Yeah, so you told, I think, I don't know how you heard about it, but you were like, hey, there's this UFO cult meeting happening at this theater that I saw David Icke at, and we should go check it out. And I was like, all right, because I was reading like Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future at the time, and just going down the UFO rabbit hole, because I saw a lot of that like everywhere, and a lot of people saying just the sentiment of like space brothers coming to deliver us from evil. We went to see the UFO cult meeting at that theater. That it's like what, 5,000 seats or something.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And the parking lot was full, and there were so many like families, like mothers and fathers with their children,
dressed nicely with
bouquets of flowers and stuff, just like piling into the theater. We were like, whoa, I did not realize this movement was like so popular right now. Like, and we got into the box office, and we were like, hey, we are here to see the UFO thing. And they're like, oh, that's gonna be in the side theater. It's like 100-seat theater or something. It's like a little lecture hall off to the side. Like, this is the Nutcracker. Like, like, okay, like, that's a relief. Dude. I thought all these like families were here to greet the Space Brothers with flowers or something, and that was a trip. That was really funny, and it was put on by, man, I meant to look it up, but it was
Benjamin Krem's assistant.
Yeah, Benjamin Krem, who was involved with the Theosophical Society.
Yeah, I think he started an organization called Share International, which is like very vague in what it is, but they're all about the New Age coming of a world teacher who's supposed to be the next Buddha and actually the Christ.
Lord Maitreya.
Yeah, totally.
Like, he's supposed to be the second coming of Christ and all of the different saviors from all the different world religions.
And he talks to Benjamin Krem in his mind. He telepathically talks to him, and he also says that the alien or the UFOs are supposed to be the coming of.
Yeah, they're the harbingers. Yeah. They're kind of they're announcing the coming of the new world teacher, which, just somebody who's reading Father Seraphim Rose is just like, this is obviously
all right, man,
Antichrist stuff going on here. So we went and we watched their slideshow. They showed like all these miracles of like, there were like there were weird like pagan idols that were like milking and stuff, and they were saying this is a miraculous instance of like the spirits of the I don't know what they were.
Yeah.
I can't even remember now. And it was a pretty like eclectic mix of people. I remember there's a Freemason dude who was like, have you guys heard of Freemasonry before? It tells you all the secret truths of history and stuff. And it was just kind of like, oh, all right, dude. Okay, man. And I remember, like, you weren't Christian at the time, but like I had like my Orthodox cross on, and you were like, man, I wish I had a cross.
Dude, I do remember saying, I was like, these guys are weirdos, dude.
These people who are into this, and like, and they were, I don't know, they were like selling crystals like in the foyer or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember we were talking to some of the people there, and I remember arguing with somebody about, like, what if these are demons? How would you know if they're not, like, deceptive, evil things? And they're like, oh, we're protected. We have good vibrations, so there's no way that we could be deceived that way. And it's like,
any view where you don't think you can be deceived that way because of your vibrations is like, man, like, that is about as pre-lest and, like, spiritual delusion as you can get. Like, what pride that comes with that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was a trip.
But yeah, I'm glad it wasn't like a million people there. It was a smaller, definitely weirder
completely
group of
sold
people.
Out theater. I mean, it might get to that point.
Yeah.
Project Bluebeam and stuff. I mean, they're definitely seeding that idea of. They've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Yeah, I mean, you can't open up anything on the History Channel without it saying everything is aliens. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter what thing you find a structure, dude, aliens, 100%. And it's just immediately quoting, like, Eric von Daniken and Chariots of the Gods and the Anunnaki and stuff. And, yeah, it's definitely pretty trippy.
Yeah, we're kind of all over the place, but that's okay. I mean, this is our first episode.
Yeah, totally.
We're gonna...
I know, at first I was like, oh, I'm kind of nervous. Now I'm like, it's not too bad. Now I'm just like talking to Jordan.
And we can cut out all the
totally.
all the dead air and all that stuff, so it's not a big deal. We're still kind of trying to find our bearings, but we know that we're just going to be talking about things that interest us.
Yeah.
And we're definitely going to have more focused episodes coming up.
Yeah.
About things.
We'll have some guests on too.
We'll have some guests. Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, we'll have focused episodes about certain topics that interest us. Probably along the lines of things we've brought up already.
Totally. Yeah, because we kind of meant this first one to be like an intro into just our backgrounds and stuff, which we've touched on a lot of things. We're going to go more in depth into, because you had a big background in, like you've already mentioned, like occultism, but also kind of like psychedelic Burning Man stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Doing a bunch of drugs. Doing a bunch of hallucinogens for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely dive into that, because that'll be really interesting. So yeah, I think we can start wrapping it up there.
So what about the name? Where'd the name come from?
Yeah, so the name is not very descriptive. It's called Synaxis. It's named after a feast day, the Synaxis of the Archangels. The word Synaxis means coming together or gathering in Greek, so it seemed fitting because we're sitting down to talk about things.
Yeah.
And it was actually going to be, I was going to name my ortho metal band that, but that never really came to fruition, and I don't know if it ever will. But
and you have a sick documentary. Talk about that.
Yeah, I might as well plug the other work I'm doing. I'm active on YouTube and Twitter right now as the Metal Mystic. That documentary's on King Diamond, Merciful Fate. I don't know how many metalheads will be listening to this, but I used to be a big metalhead, and I definitely had a lot of cognitive dissonance about the kind of darkness behind all of that. And since becoming Orthodox, I've kind of had a conflicted relationship with metal, so I started to try to kind of explore that. The whole project is basically to try to critique all the occultism that I've found in a lot of my favorite metal artists from an Orthodox Christian perspective. So, and
it's really good. I'm not just biased because Jordan's my homie. It's a really well-made documentary. It's put together really well. It's worth a watch.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So that's on my channel. That's my first full-length one. I'm working on another one about Ronnie James Dio, who I love, but like I said, I have a complicated relationship with this stuff.
Just at Metal Mystic, is that what it is?
On Twitter, it's at _Metal Mystic. On YouTube, it's at the Metal Mystic 333. Nice. I had to change the handle because the one I was using before went back to this like 10-year-old metal like channel that
nice.
All it has is like
stolen
death metal reposts on it. But it kept redirecting, and
we'll probably do some like particular episodes on either,
for sure.
On metal and occultism in general, or specific people, because there's really a lot of info to go into, and it'll be pretty interesting for this niche community.
Yes, absolutely. I have plans for that. So yeah, if people want to check that out, give me some likes and subscribes. That would be subscriptions. That would be nice. But we're gonna wrap this one up. Is there anything else you can think of to say at this point?
No, God bless.
God bless everybody. Bye.